The listing appeared at exactly the right time, which should have been the first warning. Ethan and Marissa had been watching the Florida market for months, refreshing pages late at night after work, hoping something affordable would finally surface. When the two-bedroom bungalow in St. Petersburg showed up at nearly 40,000 below surrounding homes, it felt like luck breaking through a long stretch of frustration. The photos were perfect, but not overly polished, the description detailed, but not exaggerated, and the seller's note mentioned a quick relocation due to family emergency. It sounded human, urgent, believable. Marissa found it first. She sent the link to Ethan with a single message: "This is it." By the next morning, the listing was gone. That should have been the second warning. Ethan called the number listed in the cached version he'd saved. A man named Daniel answered almost immediately, speaking in a calm, slightly hurried tone. He explained the property had received too much attention and had been temporarily pulled to avoid bidding chaos. However, he said, the owners were open to selling directly to serious buyers before relisting. He asked a few casual questions, jobs, timeline, financing, and responded with just enough skepticism to seem legitimate. Within 15 minutes, Ethan felt like he was being evaluated, not sold to. Daniel said they could visit the house that afternoon. The property looked exactly like the photos. The lawn was trimmed, the porch clean, the lockbox hanging from the door. Daniel gave them a code remotely and told them to walk through on their own because he was handling another closing across town. That detail, oddly specific, lowered their guard. Real agents were busy. Real deals overlapped. Inside, everything aligned. No staged furniture, just a partially empty home with signs of recent occupancy. Clean dishes drying in a rack, a faint smell of detergent, a couple of hangers left in a closet. It felt lived in, not curated. Marissa noticed sunlight pooling across the kitchen tiles and imagined morning coffee there. Ethan tested faucets, checked outlets, scanned corners for mold. Nothing raised concern. They called Daniel while still inside. He didn't rush them. He let silence sit between questions. When Ethan asked why the price was low, Daniel repeated the relocation story, but added that the owners wanted certainty over profit. He emphasized speed, not desperation. It was subtle, but effective. By the end of the call, Ethan was already thinking in terms of securing the deal, not questioning it. Daniel sent over documents within an hour, a purchase agreement, seller disclosures, even what appeared to be a property survey. Everything looked official. The names matched public records when Ethan checked the county site. That was the third layer of reassurance, and it worked exactly as intended. Marissa hesitated only once when she noticed the closing timeline was unusually fast, 7 days. Daniel explained it smoothly. Cash buyers are circling. If you're financing, we need commitment up front so the seller doesn't lose time. Commitment meant a deposit, not through escrow. That was the moment things could have stopped. Instead, Daniel framed it as a temporary holding deposit sent directly to the seller to secure exclusivity. He insisted it would be documented and credited at closing. He even suggested a smaller amount than expected, $10,000 instead of $20,000, making it feel like a concession. Scarcity mixed with flexibility. Ethan and Marissa discussed it that night. They sat at their small dining table, laptops open, documents spread out, both aware something felt slightly off but unable to pinpoint it. Every concern they raised had already been preemptively answered by Daniel's paperwork. It wasn't that the deal felt perfect. It felt just believable enough. They sent the money the next morning. The wiring instructions came from an email that matched the agent's name and branding. The bank details were for a Florida-based account under a name that matched the seller. Ethan called the number listed on the wiring document, and Daniel answered immediately, confirming everything. No hesitation, no pressure. When the confirmation screen appeared after the transfer, Marissa felt relief more than excitement. Relief that they had acted quickly. Relief that they hadn't missed out. That feeling lasted exactly 22 hours. The next day, Ethan tried calling Daniel to confirm next steps. No answer. He tried again. Voicemail. He sent an email.
No response. Marissa told him not to panic. She said he'd be busy with closings, she reminded him, though her voice carried less certainty than the day before. By evening, they drove back to the property. A different car sat in the driveway. A woman opened the door before they could knock. She looked confused, then concerned, then guarded as Ethan began explaining they were in the process of buying the home. "I'm not selling my house." The sentence didn't register immediately. It felt like a misunderstanding that could be clarified with a simple explanation. Ethan mentioned Daniel, the relocation, the documents. The woman shook her head slowly. "I've lived here for 8 years." Everything after that unraveled quickly. The lockbox had been removed, the number Ethan had used no longer connected, the listing had vanished entirely, not just removed, but erased from aggregator sites as if it had never existed. They called their bank. The wire had already cleared. They called local authorities. A report was filed. They were told this type of scam was becoming more common. That phrase, more common, landed harder than anything else. It meant this wasn't a sophisticated one-time deception. It meant a system, a repeatable process, something designed to work not because it was flawless, but because it only needed to be convincing long enough. The investigation revealed details that in hindsight seemed obvious. The scammer had copied a legitimate past listing, including photos and descriptions. He had scraped public records to obtain the homeowner's name. He had created a near-identical email domain differing by a single letter. The lockbox code had been acquired through a compromised agent account tied to an old listing that hadn't been properly secured. Every step relied on something real. That was the method. Nothing was entirely fabricated. Everything was borrowed, altered just enough to create a seamless illusion. Ethan replayed every conversation in his head. He realized Daniel never once pressured them aggressively. He never rushed in a way that triggered alarm. Instead, he aligned his pace with their expectations, letting urgency feel like their own idea. Marissa fixated on the house itself, the way it felt authentic. The small details, the dishes, the hangers, weren't staged. They were simply part of someone else's life, temporarily exposed and repurposed as credibility. That realization stayed with her the longest. Weeks passed with no recovery. The account used for the wire transfer had been opened under a stolen identity and emptied within hours. The phone number traced back to a VoIP service. The email server was hosted overseas. There was no Daniel. There was only a framework. Ethan became quieter, not withdrawn, but precise in his thinking, as if replaying the event could reveal a hidden checkpoint where everything might have been stopped. Marissa moved in the opposite direction, talking through every detail, searching for a moment where instinct had spoken but been ignored. They both arrived at the same conclusion from different paths. The scam didn't succeed because they were careless. It succeeded because it was designed for people exactly like them, careful enough to check details, but hopeful enough to believe them. Months later, they found another property, this time through a verified agent, with in-person meetings, escrow protections, and a timeline that felt slower than necessary, but safer than anything fast. They never mentioned the previous attempt during the process, but it shaped every decision. On closing day, when the final documents were signed and keys handed, there was no overwhelming excitement, just a quiet acknowledgement that this time everything had been visible, traceable, and real. That difference mattered more than the house itself. And still, sometimes, Marissa would think about the first one, the sunlight on the kitchen floor, the sense that everything had aligned, and feel the faint echo of how close they had come to believing in something that had never existed. Not a house, not a cellar, not even a person. Just a perfectly constructed moment designed to feel like opportunity.